And so I wanted to bring my new friend and colleague that I actually met through this last year, Ben Stecher, on. And he is going to be co-hosting a number of these chats in the next few months. I gave him some ideas. I had gone through an amazing blog that he's written. He's done a lot of audio recordings on there. He's literally traveled the world as a Parkinson's patient, a growing sort of expert leader, knowledge expert in the thought leader in the field of Parkinson's, and really has brought me a lot of insight and has educated me tremendously. So I'm really a sponge for learning about the patient experience, hopefully listening to voices and trying to amplify them. So Ben, without further ado, maybe you can tell us a little bit about Sara Riggare. I think we're going to try to pronounce it in a few different ways. We were just practicing how to say it in Swedish, but she, I was looking at her website as well. I think you'll be very excited to hear from her. She's a mom and a Parkinson's advocate and a scientist and a research queen of really interesting kind of concepts. So Ben, I will let you introduce your friend and colleague there, Sara, to us, and tell us why you picked her, and maybe a little bit about what your thoughts are on our series and co-hosting.
Hi, thank you, Indu, and hello, everybody. Good to see some now looking familiar faces again. So thank you to the PMD Alliance. Thank you, Indu. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And yeah, what I'm really looking forward to in this series is bringing what I think are some fresh perspectives on this disease and the challenges we face and how best we can move forward to ultimately get what we all want, and that's better care and better treatments for the battery of symptoms that we experience on a day-to-day basis. And to that extent, I wanted to bring in some people that have really helped me personally along my own journey. Now, my journey, as I have talked about in the past, began in 2013, but it wasn't until about 2015, 2016 that I really started to seriously look into this. And one of the first people that I tried to reach out to was Sara. And Sara was actually kind enough to respond, and we started a dialogue at that point. And we started to exchange some emails, and I actually went back recently, Sara, through the first emails that we ever sent to each other. And I could see how much our dialogue has evolved since then. And I could see kind of the groundworks for some of the things that we've been talking about were laid very early on in our dialogues with each other. But the reason why I reached out to Sara originally is because at the beginning, I think like a lot of people, my contact points for this disease were basically just my doctors. And really that was it. I mean, that's all I really knew. That was the only people that I really had in contact with in relation to this disease. But at some point I realized that I need to go through people that had experienced some of these things before, and that in many ways, a lot of the expertise, or what we think of as experts, is not just in the house, it's not just in the research lab, it's not just in the clinics, it's also in the day-to-day living of people who have been experiencing some of the things that we've been going through for much longer than we have. And in my opinion, one of the foremost trailblazers in all of this has been Sara. Sara's an engineer by training, and she brings a lot of that engineering discipline to her research now in promoting self-care and improving people's ability to care for themselves and to really empower the individual to be their own professional, to be their own expert. And yeah, with that, I'll be handing it over to Sara now to quickly introduce herself, to say whatever that she wants to this community, and to, I guess, give us a sense of this journey that you've been on, because unlike unlike me, for instance, this has been brewing in you for many decades, really. So maybe you can walk us through some of those early days and some of the revelations that came up along the way.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Indu, and thank you, PMD Alliance, for hosting this. I'm very happy to be here. And thank you for that wonderful introduction. You almost make me blush. I'm very modest. I'm Swedish, so I'm very modest. So I live in Stockholm, Sweden, and I had my first symptoms of Parkinson's disease at age 13 in 1984. So I didn't know at the time that what I had was Parkinson's. Neither did the doctors. So the first thing I noticed was that I was at a music performance where relatives of mine were playing the accordion and violin and dancing and singing, and everybody in the room clapped and stomped in sync with the music, and I wanted to do the same. And the clapping was okay, but when I tried to move my feet in rhythm with the music, nothing happened. It was like there were no signals from my brain to my foot, which of course was exactly what it was, but I didn't know that at the time. And being a teenager, of course, I didn't want to be different. I didn't want to make a fuss, so I said nothing. Over the following few years, there were more things that I discovered that sometimes were difficult doing. I didn't swing one of my arms when I walked. Of course, I didn't connect that with Parkinson's at the time. I had no idea. I had difficulty with fine movements like buttoning small buttons or putting on my socks sometimes. And I also struggled balance-wise occasionally. I didn't say anything, but of course my mother eventually discovered that, as mothers do, and sent me to, I ended up at the school physician eventually, he wrote a referral to me to see a neurologist. And the first time I saw a neurologist was in 1987. Yeah, 1987. On the 9th of June, actually, I went back and looked at my notes at some point. I actually have my healthcare records on paper that I asked for a long time after. And the first time I went to the neurologist, I was 16 years old, and I felt very out of place. I felt like a UFO where I was in the waiting room with all these people. I didn't feel comfortable. I didn't feel like I belonged there. But I knew that something was amiss with my body. So I was happy to be there in a way, because I wanted to know what was wrong. And this neurologist looked at me, put me through the usual tests, and then he told me, there's nothing wrong with you. What your experience is purely psychosomatic. And I don't blame him, because in sort of 99 cases out of 100, probably more or less, when a teenage, often girls, sort of say they have sort of diffuse symptoms of neurological symptoms, it probably is psychosomatic, but I was the case where that was wrong. But and also I didn't know that at the time either. So when I left him, I felt unseen, unheard, disappointed, and dismissed. So that was not nice. The interesting part, though, is that that's not what he wrote in the record. In the record, he wrote possibly an hereditary form of dystonia, which was the diagnosis I was given a few years after that, which is, besides being a Parkinson's symptoms, is a group of diseases of its own. So for 18 years or 15 years or so, I thought I had generalized dystonia, until I came across a different neurologist than my ordinary one. The first one, I didn't go to him more than one more time, because I didn't feel he could help me the way I wanted to. But and then so I switched to a new one, and then because I came across a third one that did research in generalized dystonia. So I booked a case, an appointment with him to get to know more about the research in that field. When I came to him, it was 2003, and I had a 4 months baby at home. I was 32 years old, and I expected him to talk to me about the research in dystonia. He didn't. He put me through the neurological tests, and he said, well, you don't have dystonia, you have Parkinson's disease. And then he said, have a nice day. And I didn't have a nice day after that, because it felt like I fell down into a black hole. I was 32 years old, had a baby at home, and I thought my life was over, and I thought I was going to stop walking when my baby was starting to walk. Well, the baby is now 18 years old, and I'm still walking, and I do use a rollator or a walker when I walk outside, just for safety. But other than that, I think I'm doing pretty well. So I think I'll stop there for now and see what, if anything comes up, and I'll continue when on some sort of story after that, I think.
That's a remarkable story. I'm sorry that you had so many twists and turns, and it sounds like quite a negative experience, I think, with some of healthcare. And Ben and I were talking about the fact that, I think the sort of borderland between Parkinson's, including non-motor symptoms, motor symptoms, and even mental health is so enmeshed. And I think a lot of, especially younger women, go through this experience where they're misdiagnosed sometimes, or people don't know exactly what's going on, and they're told literally that they are crazy.
It's in their heads.
Yeah, and it's literally in their heads. And this is a quote that I've heard from many young women. And I think that then as we treat people, we give them the right diagnosis and we follow people over time. It ends up becoming this sort of, there's the motor symptoms and then everything else. And we almost are in this sort of dualism of what's real and what other people don't see and maybe in your head. And what does that sort of set up for you as a way to then interact with, these sorts of providers moving forward? And how have you kind of come to terms with it?
So the first one I met, of course, he was of a dying breed. I would say he actually is retired since many years now. But the next one I had, I was with him for over 25 years. So there are definitely different. There are some good ones and bad ones out there. And I think the most important lesson I learned from that is that if I feel that the one I'm seeing is not seeing me, I need to switch. I need to find someone who does. Someone I can work with. That's the most important lesson from that for me.
Yeah. Ben, what's your thoughts on that too? I think you had a little bit of some twists and turns to your diagnosis, right?
Yeah, and it really does speak to what Sara said. It's about finding the right person, a person who takes an interest in you as an individual and in quote unquote your case as well. And that's something that I was able to find at some point down the road. A neurologist who really took an interest in you, in your particular case, wants to get to know a little bit about you, opens him or herself up a little bit to you and some of the struggles that they face as well. And it's not like, and this is something that I actually want to get at with Sara, a lot of it is about the power dynamics that take place once a patient enters a doctor's office. There's kind of an established hierarchy that society has where we are the patients, we enter into this clinical space, and we kind of lose agency in some ways. We lose some measure of control over the decisions that happen to us. And this, again, is something that Sara's been championing for as long as I've known her, and something that she's doing a lot of great work on is shifting that dynamic, getting us to the point where we're much more on a more equal playing field. And I guess, Sara, I'd love to just hear you speak a little bit about how you've seen this change happen over time and where it is you think we are today in establishing kind of a more level playing field.
Yeah, sure. I'll be happy to. I just want to say first that in hindsight, I wouldn't have wanted to have been diagnosed sooner than I was with Parkinson's disease, because if I had been diagnosed with a disease that is so strongly associated with the elderly, no offense to anyone in the group, but if I had been in my teens, there's a lot of things I think I wouldn't have been doing now. It would have become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So I'm actually happy that I was misdiagnosed for almost 20 years. Strange as it may sound, because that for me was the best. It didn't change my treatment. It didn't change my prognosis to be incorrectly diagnosed. But so what happened that day in 2003 was my view of myself and my situation changed. Nothing else changed. Not my treatment, not my symptoms, not my prognosis. So misconceptions of Parkinson's are still a big problem in treating and dealing with Parkinson's today. And I think that'll come up more and more during this talk today, I think, during our conversation.
Yeah, I think that the branding of Parkinson's has been basically the picture that you see of the white old man who's stooped and with a cane. And so much of what we do is dispel the myths and training, and even to our fellow neurologists, it's it's just a rebranding. People really don't think that you can have it. And I think, Omatola and some of the other, Avengers and some of the movement now is really just to show the faces of what Parkinson's looks like. And I think women are another unsung sort of voice that is huge, that I think is, I think with all of the discussions and we've had in the last year, I've been talking to colleagues and said, and there's been a notion that a lot of people have even questioned whether they want to stay in medicine and practice as they have been, given, a lot of the issues that have come up even for healthcare providers with the stresses of the pandemic. But I think for me, moving forward, it's really going to be about listening to the unsung voices and trying to sort of get care to all the people that we haven't been getting care for. Because I think that my sense has been that I've spent probably 20 years improving care for the niche populations that are already getting reasonable care, which are often the, at least in North America, the white men who are married and affluent, that are educated. So I think we really have done a disservice to this disease. And I think we have an opportunity, hopefully, with, raising and amplifying voices of like yours, of, somebody who is a woman, who's a mom, who's, educated, who's owning their health and is, really going to hopefully change the dialogue. And Ben is very similar. So yeah, I think that is a disservice. One thing that I wanted to ask you, Ben, you use the word agency, and I think you and I have been talking about this a little bit. And Sarah, I saw in some of your writing about, sort of the sense that one has control over their own outcome. And, we'll pull up, I had taken a couple of screenshots of some of the writing that you've done recently. It seems to be a lot more in that space. Maybe I could give you guys a minute or two just to clarify what that word agency means to you and sort of how this is sort of working in your mindset these days and how you can give advice to other folks as well around that.
Sure. I mean, the word agency and self-efficacy in these series comes a lot from the work of Albert Bandura at Stanford. I think he was a social scientist. I'm not sure his profession, but he's done a lot of great work in that. And there are lots of these programs, self-management programs that are based on his theories. And in essence, it says that if you have, it also builds on this theories of self-determination theory, which says that if you feel that you can have control over some parts of your life, and you feel you can excel at some parts, and you're socially connected, you will feel empowered. You will be a stronger person for it. And for me, especially, my learning about so as much as possible about my condition, about Parkinson's in general, about everything I can find, really has really been the basis for me being where I am today. I wouldn't be as well as I am today, and I wouldn't be as confident as I am today if I hadn't done all that work previously. Yeah.
And also, to give a little bit of a personal anecdote for myself, this question of agency is something that I'm grappling with in particular nowadays, as I contemplate DBS and giving over control not only to doctors and researchers, but to machines as well at this point. And it's a question that I've often asked a lot of the people that have kind of, you see psychiatrists and psychologists and the surgeon and all of the people that are part of this journey that you go on. They all have a role to play, but then there's the question of the self and what it is to be a human agent in this world. And it's something that is constantly on my mind these days. And it's a question I've been asking all these people that I've met across the way is, what do you see is happening to patients' sense of self after they get DBS? And Indu, I'd love to maybe hear a little bit about your thoughts, but I'm sure you've seen patients go through that process many times. It's something that I still haven't gotten any clear answers on. I'm guessing because there are no clear answers on something this complicated. But what do you see happens to a person's identity and their sense of control over their life, really, after they go through something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a pretty interesting kind of thing to watch patients go through as well. And I think we've refined our techniques, and our outcomes have been changing as well in terms of how we measure how people are doing. Because I think early on, and I've been at this for a little while, I think I was one of the medical students on, honestly, Tony Lang and Andres Lozano's service when we were doing some of the original lesional surgeries back in Toronto when I was a medical student. I won't say how old I was then, but it was, a number of years ago. And so literally, we were killing, sort of tissue or irreversibly at those times. I think we then saw that we could do some sort of, inserting electrodes and programming on side effects. But originally, many of the outcomes were around motor, sort of, can you walk, sit, stand, walk, measuring times of movement, looking at tremor outcomes and things like that. What I've really been interested in, and I think we don't do a good job of in general in care of Parkinson's, is sort of understanding what really makes patients feel that their quality of life is well, is good. What are the outcome measures for Parkinson's specifically? And it's going to vary probably depending on what you're doing at that stage of life. And I think there's so many things that we don't measure well. And that's why you and I have been discussing this a little bit, Ben, about, what really makes people tick, what gives people sometimes a sense of purpose, a reason to live, what changes for them, their quality of life to make that better. And I think we haven't done a good job of measuring that. And then, when you're inserting things that we can then change the circuitry around, I think it can change sometimes some of these subtle things and sometimes even less subtle things about personality, about, impulsivity, about different sorts of things. And so I think patients, feel sometimes that they aren't exactly the same person that after surgery as they perhaps were before. And, how can we measure that as well when we're looking and seeing people who are so much better motorically, oh, well, you had this. And we sometimes show people videos of like how badly dyskinetic they were, or how their tremor looked before. And then we show them a video of how good they are now and say, why aren't you feeling better? Why are you not able to thrive? And so I think it really boils down to some of these basic things that I think this conversation hopefully is around is, what sort of makes a difference for our patients and how to better measure those. And I think we have to engage our patients in trying to understand that it shouldn't just be, a video or something that you can externally measure as a doctor.
Yeah, and I can speak a bit. I've had a few questions in the chat. I have not had DBS is the first answer. I have during the last year or so been involved in being evaluated and discussing DBS. But my neurologist, my movement disorder doctor and I have come to the conclusion that my particular type of gait disturbance, which is freezing of gait particularly, it does not respond. It doesn't respond automatically well to DBS. It's not. It can do, but it's not. My type is not It's not self-evident that it would be responding well. And two, that there still is a bit of. So one of the most common side effects of DBS is, of course, speech impediments, and that is something that I would not want to risk in my line of the way I lead my life. So we've decided to wait with that, but it's still something that I have as an option further down the line. And to respond to David's question, yes, I have been bilingual since my teens, even since before my teens, actually. I would say that part of my teens, I probably was more or less trilingual. I still can probably get around on French as well. And I know some German and some Spanish as well.
Wow.
But on what you're saying, Indu, about outcome measures, I do completely agree with that. Because and I wrote a blog about this a few years back on what's in a fall, because that was before I got my walker, and when I think I maybe have used a walking stick or a cane by then. But so for healthcare, the imperative is that I don't fall. But for me, I want to avoid falling, but still keep challenging myself, and that's. You can't sort of measure a non-fall, but that's what I want to keep, because if you always stay in your comfort zone will shrink, and you will become more and more sedentary. You will become more and more homebound. So I want to keep challenging myself, doing things that I want to do, without taking unnecessary risks. And with my role later, I can do that. And since I probably wouldn't have said yes to a rollator walker if someone would have suggested it. But when I decided, I realized it myself, and then it was my choice. It was an easy choice to make.
Makes sense. I wanted to spend a minute learning a little bit about your, I don't know how to say this word, SPETS patient framework. I think it's really interesting, and Ben and I were sharing a little bit about it this morning. So basically, maybe you could teach us a little bit about it, but
yeah, sure.
Yeah.
So spetspatient this is a Swedish word that I coined a few years back. I use it to describe something I've seen for years and years, and that is patients and their loved ones, their family members, doing things that healthcare doesn't expect them to do, and wanting to do more than they, and learning more as much as possible about our situations. So there is an American word, e-patient, which is similar but not exactly the same. But you can look that up on Wikipedia, e-patient. So I was inspired by that word, but so the word e-patient didn't work. I've tried using it in Sweden for a long time. It didn't sort of catch on. But then I realized at this point when this happened that what we e-patients do is very similar to what lead users do, and lead users are people in it is a word used in technology and design a lot, where people innovate on their own needs, and these products that come out of that can become sort of multi-million-dollar sort of product lines, like mountain bikes, for instance, were first invented by some lead users in California who wanted to ride their bikes on mountain trails. So they reinforced them and put stronger sort of parts on it to make it last longer. And that was then developed. This, of course, they did this in one of the guys' garage. So that's an example of lead users. So what I realized was that what we do as patients and our family members helping us is very close to what lead users do, but in our own health. So I looked at what lead users translate to in Swedish. It's spetsanvändare, where användare is user, and spets means an arrowhead or a spearhead or an arrow or something pointing in one direction or leading the way. So I exchanged the word användare for the word patient, which is patient in Swedish. The word was born. And this is something I've been leading a project on for a few years with governmental funding from our innovation agency. And we've developed this framework, the lead patient, the spetspatient framework, which is, so the concept itself is not Parkinson specific, it's sort of across diagnoses. And we've mapped out a number of activities, competencies, that lead user patients, spetspatienter use or adopt to deal with our situations, and those are the ones in the framework.
Okay. And what are the ones? Ben, have you seen this framework? It's kind of cool. I think it totally it embodies a lot of what you do as well, which is some advocacy and some mentoring.
Communicator, definitely. Ben is a communicator.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, I think, just to say, so there's activist, self-care expert, communicator, entrepreneur, innovator, mentor, tracker, hacker, knowledge seeker, patient researcher, healthcare partner, and healthcare coordinator. So is this one person has all of these attributes?
One person can use several at the same time and go in and out of. I don't think it's not reasonable to believe that everybody is all of them at the same time, but people use the ones they need and adapt and they're interested in. So I mean, Ben has probably always been a communicator. So when he became when he was diagnosed, it wasn't probably far-fetched for him to continue communicating. And I'm an engineer, so I will keep engineering sort of.
Yeah. Yeah. And to get back to that sort of the work of Bender, I think, Ben, I don't know if you know him. He's actually Canadian originally. He's from a very small town in, I think, near Edmonton, but he's now, I think, in Stanford. He's 95 years old, and he has this amazing, he's sort of had this wonderful work on self-agency, self-efficacy, and
yeah,
really
yeah.
sort of boiling down the principles. And I think you write a little bit about this, Sarah, in one of your blogs. Basically, I think one of the principles is to get educated. So as much information as you can. The second is sort of the sense that you equip yourself with a team of people around you that can help you be cheerlead you and inspire you and poke you to do things better.
Challenge you, right? Challenge you.
Challenge you. Yes,
And
exactly.
support, yeah.
And yourself, you also are supposed to challenge yourself. So like putting out goals and frameworks that are, bite-sized, but things that are going to push you. And then the fourth one, I think, was interesting to me as a part of that concept was this sort of mind-body interplay that Ben and you and I have also talked about, which is basically saying that, there are things in your body that may affect your mind and things in your mind that may affect your body, and sort of understanding that so that you can actually feel sort of get a sense from your own body sometimes of what you need and what you need to be doing. So if you're anxious, you know how to help yourself. So I think it's a really cool framework to, I think, apply to Parkinson's. It wasn't a Parkinson specific framework at all, but I think there's a woman in Colorado, I think her name's Diane Cook, and we're hoping to have her on as well as a person who's been working.
She's great. Yeah, she's
Parkinson
great.
And has a program to teach and empower and really, I think, harness this sort of network of people around you in your life. And perhaps even, one of the things that I'm inspired by both of you is the sort of concept of mentorship. And I think it sounds like Sarah had been Ben's mentor and Ben is mentoring other folks. Can you both speak to that a little bit? And as sort of a concept of, I think we've all agreed that I think the old school model of the power dynamic of me having a knowledge that you don't as a patient and keeping you in the dark and seeing you one-on-one, is probably antiquated, right? So maybe speak to this sort of new framework a little bit. And I think, Ben, you also mentioned mental health check-in buddies or different sorts of frameworks in which you can kind of align even with the patient community, people living with Parkinson's.
So
yeah, for me,
start.
Sorry,
Go ahead, Ben. Go ahead.
A quick interjection. So for me, it really comes down to navigating any journey, really. I mean, if you were to go into a forest that you've never been to before, would you want to take a cartographer who mapped out the forest from an aerial view but hasn't actually gone through the path themselves? Or would you want somebody who's walked that path before you have? I mean, ideally, you'd want as much information as possible and to bring all those things to bear. And this gets at what me and Sarah spend a lot of time talking about is the system is set up in such a way that it gives you access to the doctor who has a wealth of knowledge and who can help you navigate certain aspects of this. But it doesn't give you that direct access to the person that's walked this path before you, that person that can show you where all the bumps on the road, that can show you where to step and where not to step. And yeah, Sarah has very much played that role for me at many times along the way. I try to do the same for others when and where I can. But I think what this Sarah, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the SPETS patient framework, what it does is it kind of formalizes this, that kind of mentor, not necessarily just the mentor role, but it formalizes the patient role in the system. And because prior to, there's no formal training that anyone can go through. If you want to become a patient advocate, there's no school of advocacy that you can sign up for and start getting classes in, and there's no career path down that road as well either. And from what I see, the SPETS patient framework is really designing that career path in many ways. It's helping people see, okay, this is the kind of road I can walk. This is how I have to navigate the system. And this is how I can insert myself into this larger community.
Have you guys had to model that directly? Sorry, and Sarah, I want to,
No worries.
But I wanted to find out how you guys have actually formalized. I mean, luckily in the digital age, I think there's a bit of Twitter and people kind of, amplify things a little bit that way, but maybe there's things that are happening that I don't even really understand or know about in the community that you guys could teach me a little bit about.
So people seem to sort of meet each other in different ways, of course. Social media is a great thing for meeting, especially when we over geographical sort of distances. So if anyone's particularly interested in educated discussions on research in Parkinson's, there's a Facebook group I can recommend called Parkinson Research Interest Group, where Ben and I are both part of the administrative team. And there are lots of other resources out there, but that's my go-to place, definitely. But going back then to that day when I was told that I had Parkinson's, of course that hit me badly. I felt like I fell down into a black hole. But once I sort of had crawled back up, and having a baby that needed me wasn't a bad thing at that stage, because I had to look outside of myself, and so. But once I've sort of regained my footing a bit, I started connecting with others. So I started a young onset group in Stockholm, expanded to Sweden, etc., etc. But then in 2010, I decided that I wanted to take it further. So I decided that I wanted to combine my engineering skills with my patient experiences to try and give people coming, so people sort of the next group of people, paying it forward in a way and giving them the map I didn't have. And in a way, as you say, Indu, the Spetspatient framework is a part of that map for sure. It's definitely not what I would have expected in 2010 the map to be, but it is definitely a big piece of the puzzle. But so what I did then was I wanted to connect. I saw myself as being able to be like a translator between researchers and people with persons with Parkinson's disease. And so, and I realized that to be taken seriously by researchers, you have to be one yourself. And I wasn't, so I was bummed out there for a bit. But then my husband said, but why don't you become one? And I sort of thought, no, I can't do that. But then I realized that maybe I can. So I found a master's program at Karolinska Institute in Stockholm, a master's program in health informatics, which is the use of information and communication technology in health and healthcare. And they wanted to have a group of students with both medical background and technical background. And since I was an engineer, I was eligible, and I applied, and I was accepted. So in 2010, I left my job in environmental risk assessment and scenario analysis, and went back to school. I went back to university. It was a wild ride. On the first day, we were 46 students from 13 different countries. The youngest was a 22-year-old eye surgeon from Uzbekistan. Wow. And the oldest was a then, I think, 46-year-old the medical doctor from Iran, I think, and there were computer programmers from Addis Ababa in Ethiopia. There were people from all over the world, and then there was me.
That's amazing.
And every day was like a UN convention, and we learned so much. We learned from each other, we learned together, and we learned from the teachers. And from that, I went into doing a PhD. I started my doctoral research in 2012. So it's been a while now, but I'm now on the last leg of it, hopefully. So my research is in something called personal science, which is a framework for self-study, you might say. It's a new way of thinking. It's a way of formalizing the quantified self and self-tracking technology and efforts that have come out of lots of tech companies. But this is sort of the underlying theories and frameworks supporting the individual. And it's so exciting to be able to contribute in that way. And what I've been doing over these years, I've been exploring my own Parkinson's in different ways, doing self-tracking. And I have learned so much, both about Parkinson's, about the academic system, about publications, scientific publication, which is a big thing in itself and not as easy as you would. There are so many hurdles in there. But and also I've learned doing also conventional research methods like surveys and interviews and qualitative and quantitative research. And it's been a challenge, but it's been so much, so valuable for me, and so I wouldn't have missed it for the world. So and in this process, I've starting sort of probably in 2008 or something, I went to my neurologist, the one I had for 25 years, with a printout from the website Patients Like Me, where you could, I'm not sure now, I haven't been on there for a long time, but you could make a doctor's visit sheet where you could actually sort of track your condition over a few days and then compare and bring it to your doctor. And when I did that, I realized that it gave me more of it made the discussions on a higher level, because we had something concrete to talk about.
Yeah.
We could discuss the different aspects of this printout sheet, this doctor visit sheet, and it gave me a level of confidence that I hadn't had before. So I continued to explore that further. I read more. I found more information, and then here we are.
Yeah, that's really amazing. I know it's been a long road. I was reading a little bit about that for your PhD. So congratulations on almost being at the last leg of it. That's really amazing, and hard work for people who don't have a kid and aren't living with Parkinson's is super stressful. So amazing that you've really, I think, jumped in with both feet, because I think you got a sense that you needed to kind of do this to really feel like you could get to the next level of really having the dialogue. Was that something that did you feel like you needed to be validated with this degree, do you think, to be able to talk to the scientists? I basically did 2 years of an undergrad and then went to medical school. So I have very little, background other than my medical degree. So I just am trying to understand kind of
So I probably thought I had to have the degree, but once I got started, I realized for me, it's more about what I can do with the degree than the degree itself. Yeah, which is why I'm not too bothered with it having taken so long, because I've been doing so many interesting things in the meanwhile.
Yeah.
But now it feels just silly not to make the last leg as well.
Well, we look forward to celebrating. We'll have a glass of champagne with you,
yes. In Barcelona next year, hopefully.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we can have a celebration here. Maybe we'll be further along in our cause to get better, patient advocacy going. So people are asking about the tracking, how it works. Maybe Ben, you could also tell us a little bit about if you track with any sort of software or a sheet of paper. And on that note, Sara, since you're a young woman living with Parkinson's, we're actually going to be having next week a discussion with other women living with Parkinson's from around the world to understand and try to amplify a little bit more of the woman's voice in Parkinson's. And one thing that really came to light, sorry to ask so many questions at once, but it applies to this, is how the hormonal cycle, so the periods and things like that, may also be tracked for certain people who, like with many of our women, they get worse during the either the week before or the before their period, during their period. Maybe you could just speak to, are you tracking these sorts of things? What are you using currently? It sounds like you've explored a lot, and then we'll find out from Ben too what type of tracking.
So I haven't met any woman in fertile age with Parkinson's that isn't affected by their hormonal cycles in their Parkinson's symptoms. So, but I also haven't met. I haven't come across so let's put it like this. There are surprisingly few neurologists interested in talking about it. If you find if when you're before you sort of have your own sense of confidence about your own journey and your own experiences, if a doctor tells you, well, that's not Parkinson's related, you probably believe them. But they're not always right, are they? Unfortunately. But yes, I will talk about, so definitely, that's definitely an issue. And there are several good apps for tracking hormonal cycles and periods and stuff. I don't remember what the one I use is called, but there are several good ones. So that's very useful to keep track of. And as for other things that track, so this is a challenge in Parkinson's disease, because there are, as we know, there are no objective biomarkers. So I sometimes say that I have diabetes envy, because with people with type 1 diabetes, they have both a clear biomarker for the current state as well as for the long-term progression in the HbA1c. So of course I realized that that is a very sort of disregard for their struggle as well. But in regards of a biomarker, they have a biomarker, and they have a biomarker that's very easily quantifiable, that relates pretty well to the state of mind and body, and also probably most importantly that their doctors are also interested in, because that gives them leverage in the encounter. They have the data that the doctor wants, but in Parkinson's we don't have that. So what to do? In Parkinson's it's very difficult because, as I said, we don't have a clear biomarker. And also my studies of both myself and other people with Parkinson's have demonstrated very clearly that the burden of tracking is a very real thing. If you feel well enough, you don't want to spend your time tracking. You want to enjoy the time you have when you're feeling well. So I only track for specific purposes and for specific periods of time. And that's actually probably less than once a year in total. But what I found is it can be useful to track for a few days before a doctor visit, just to give a sense of what's my current state, how can I describe it to the doctor in the best way, and what do I need, is there anything I want to change, and if so, what? So I mostly use, I've been using trackers. I've been using probably every Parkinson's app invented, but none of them are good enough. They're just not versatile enough. So when I track now, I actually mostly use a Google form, where I make an entry for my medication intakes. So I get a timestamp for that, and I make notes of my observations. And then I look at that and I analyze and see how I can change if I need to change. It's not ideal, but it's what I can do with the time I want to spend doing it. Sure. But the biggest thing is the learning that happens from tracking. So by tracking more intensely, I have learned to recognize the feeling in my body of when it's time for next medication, etc. So the learning aspect is the most important thing of self-tracking, and that is why if you track for some other purpose, if you use one of the devices you get from healthcare or similar, if you don't get access to the data yourself, you can't learn from this. Yeah. So that's why I recently co-authored a paper on that open access that's called A Long Way to Go, a patient perspective of digital health in Parkinson's disease. Yeah. Maybe you can share the link to that as well. I see you sharing all sorts of links. Yeah. In the I read that,
and Ben and I talked about that. It was great. Ben, I wanted to give you a chance to talk about tracking, and then also to give you a chance to ask Sara anything. We have about, this flew by. It's crazy. 7 minutes left. No. I think we need a whole morning or something.
We'll have to make this another time as well, I guess.
Yeah.
We'll need to make it again. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So most of what I know about tracking has actually come from Sara. So I don't know if there's much I can add to that. I feel like she's forgotten more about self-tracking than I'll ever know. But there is a question that I really wanted to get at. And actually, the big reason why I brought you on here, Sara, is to ask this question. Now, Sara and I chat a lot, and kind of in our dynamic, I throw a lot of big, crazy ideas at her, and she kind of settles me down and is a little bit more pragmatic than I am. But I'm going to ask her to kind of put herself in wear my shoes in a sense. So I'm an idealist. I like to kind of think about the best of all possible worlds and what we need to do to get us to that best of all possible worlds, and if it is at all possible. So Sara, in your idealized world, if the world were a perfect place, obviously we wouldn't have Parkinson's, but let's say Parkinson's still exists.
Sure.
What would healthcare look like? What would the interactions between a patient, a doctor, and the healthcare systems actually look like in your idealized world? And then what are some of the steps we can start doing now to help us inch closer to that world?
Great question. I love it. And I love it when you throw those big ideas at me, Ben. You challenge me as well. And that's the best thing I know, to be challenged and to learn. So I don't stop doing that. But to go for your questions, I would say, in an idealized world, we all know that healthcare is not equipped to deal with the chronic diseases. We've known that for 25 odd years. We've known that healthcare, the model healthcare uses is based in a time where acute and sudden and sort of injuries were the main problems. We now know that over half of the population in every country has one or more chronic diseases. So we know that healthcare, the model of healthcare is not the right one. So what do we need instead? We need a healthcare that where doctors and patients are working together towards a common goal, an individual goal, which is then ideally or definitely sort of set by the person with the condition, with the problems themselves. We also need to eradicate all the silos in healthcare. So healthcare needs to work more multidisciplinary across diseases, because of course most of us here on this call have more than Parkinson's to deal with health-wise, and still healthcare insists on dividing us up in our different diagnoses or different ICD codes. So that's what we need, and the healthcare needs to be a coach rather than an expert. We need to be experts together. And to reach there, I mean, we don't have to wait. We who need healthcare. I know I wouldn't be as well as I am. I wouldn't be as courageous and as daring to take all the action I do if I didn't know, if I wasn't sure that I had the support system around me that I need, both in terms of my immediate support system, my family and friends, but also healthcare. I know that I need to have someone who can give me the medications I need, the prescriptions I need, someone who can discuss with me on a high level when new problems arise, because they do. So that's one thing that we need to do. We need to equip ourselves with a good team around us. And that takes some work, I'm afraid. And no one is going to do it for us. We need to do it ourselves. We can learn from each other. That's the other thing. That we can do already today is to learn. We can teach it. We can learn together. I always say that I've learned so much more from fellow patients, and that is both in Parkinson's and other conditions, than I have from healthcare. And that doesn't mean I have learned nothing from healthcare. I've learned a lot from healthcare, but as Ben said, they don't know what it's like to live with these diseases, these conditions. And even if there's a different disease, there are lots of similarities about the helplessness we feel and when our bodies betray us and don't do what we ask of it. So we can learn in so many ways. We can learn by reading scientific papers. We can learn from each other. We can learn by just being curious and putting things in perspective and thinking about things and being curious. Yeah. So those are some things we can do already today.
So it sounds like educate yourself. We need to educate doctors. We need to educate each other within our silos and break down the silos, it sounds like. And then empowerment. So, finding things that you can control and then going after those so that you can feel a sense of agency. It sounds like the support system. So finding people in your world that lift you up and each other, even in the community of patients. Is there any surprises that we have 2 minutes left? Was there anything surprising to you in your journey of somebody, maybe a team member of the multidisciplinary team that gave you something that was sort of magical that you never expected? Because I think sometimes we say, there's the doctor, here's the patient. Who is that sort of person that maybe was not in the box? And maybe I'll give you a minute to Ben, that could be that person.
No worries. So that's easy. So the person that it's both relating to the profession as well as the individual themselves. So physiotherapy is grossly under sort of valued in Parkinson's in many places. I know not everywhere, but physiotherapy is essential. And the person I've probably learned the most from of a clinical profession is a physiotherapist.
Awesome. Ben, who's the surprise person that you sort of have found the most helpful?
Well, I guess it's not that much of a surprise, but it's kind of counterintuitive to everything I was kind of talking about. It was my neurologist, Dr. Alfonso Fasano. Early on in my journey, I had way more questions than anybody could answer. I was dying for somebody to just kind of sit down with me and answer all my questions systematically one by one. And he took the time to walk me through all the stupid questions I had at the beginning, all the silly things that I was going through my head. He really took the time to break it down for me. And I had a lot of questions about the brain and neuroscience, and I just wanted to absorb as much knowledge as I possibly could. And really, he took the time to guide me through some of the early steps and to set me out on the right track. So yeah, I'm grateful to him for playing that role for me.
And that speaks to the individual perspective I mentioned, because I think he listened to you. You could meet as equals, and that's the same thing as Josefa Domingos, the physiotherapist in Portugal, that did that for me.
Awesome. Well, I think it's about finding people that you connect with too. I think, we don't have all the answers in medicine. I wish we did. And there's so much that we honestly did not learn in medical school, where many of us who are educators also are trying to figure out how to work some of this stuff into a 4-year curriculum. I don't know what they're teaching, but they won't spend like 5 minutes learning about wellness or palliative care or anything that matters to me. So I think we have to figure out how to sneak these things in secretly into the curriculum as well.
And that speaks to you're not fully trained when you graduate, right? No one is.
Yeah, it's definitely a lifelong journey of education, and we're so excited to be on this journey with you. And Ben, thank you so much for taking the time. And I think, kudos to our advocacy groups too, that are giving us a space to get together and host this sort of thing and have these discussions, which I think we'll continue to do. Ben, excited to have you as a co-host and to have you bring amazing people to me. You've done a lot of that in the last year, and I'm eager to learn from both of you moving forward. So Sara, hopefully we can continue to partner with discussions like this, and we'd love to get your input as well on the women and that sort of tracking as well. I think they'd love your input. So thank you again. I'm going to hand it back to Andrea for our final goodbye wave, and thanks for the audience for joining as well.
Yeah,
thank you for having me.
Sarah, we always end with a goodbye wave. So if you've had your video off, we invite you to turn it on, and across the world, put it on gallery view, scroll through, and you can see all of the smiling faces. We're in this together. Thank you for your excellent questions. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for being here. And thank you to our 3 guests for an amazing hour together.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. It was a pleasure being here.